When Madden 22 launched last fall, it continued a trend of regurgitating the same familiar football content, including using recent cover athletes on the cover in Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, which I thought was hilarious considering they'd each been on their own Madden covers less than 5 games ago. But regardless, the franchise mode remained very stale while they continued to pump new things into Ultimate Team because that's where all their focus has been. However, as the year went on, they kind of made some commitments to make improvements to franchise mode during the season, which seems like something that they rarely do because they rarely iterate on the game during the season because they even rarely iterate between versions. But there were some great improvements to franchise mode throughout the year. And as someone that played maybe 10 hours of the game back at launch on EA Access, having got to play it on EA Access this past spring because it was put up on there for free and I didn't have to actually purchase it, I did find that the franchise mode has improved. And for being able to purchase this game for say $20 or less today, because we're reaching the end of Madden 22's lifespan before 23 comes out, it's obviously getting deeply discounted. Madden 22's franchise mode is okay at $20. They've made some improvements here that I do think add depth to the game and ultimately don't take it to the lengths that I think franchise players like myself want to see it reach, but it's at least moving in the right direction. I know that's a cliched thing that's been said on IGN reviews about Madden year after year for the last 5-10 years, but the reality is they did add some depth here when it comes to being able to manage even individual scouts, coaches, having skill trees for them, and as somebody that actively still plays NCAA Football 14, obviously those skill trees are nothing new. It's a little bit of an RPG mechanic, though, being added to Madden, and something that we have not seen for quite some time. Game planning and training, though, being something that I automate on a weekly basis because I don't actually want to walk through all the practice drills. Being able to select, what types of players are going to be out there. Are they going to be in full pads, half pads? What are the starters going to be practicing? Or only the backups going to be practicing? Is it going to be split? Those type of options, while not being an overwhelming amount of options because I just listed them all, and just selecting what type of play style we want to defend on defense and use on offense, while again limited from something like 7-8 options, isn't a ton of choices, and obviously many franchise players want to see more choices than that on a weekly game planning basis. But the truth is, this is more than we had in previous Maddens for the last decade or so, and being able to game plan in this fashion and do it relatively quickly in a menu system that I think is quite intuitive is pretty exciting for me and is definitely a step, again, in the right direction. The last Madden I actually purchased was Madden 19 because of its overhaul to the custom draft classes and the fact that I really thought that was going to change franchise mode. And while that's kind of stagnated over the last few Maddens, they did make some improvements to that as well in the way of having scouts and their skill trees. But the reality is, well, it's not just that simple press 3 buttons and you have a scouting idea like it was in, say, Madden 21. It still isn't fleshed out enough where I don't think you have a good enough idea of the player you're drafting until ultimately you've already drafted them. You just aren't getting enough information up front, in my opinion, to make a well thought out decision. I know that that's kind of realistic to true Madden, but what I don't think is realistic at all is these super scripted, very rigid sort of cutscenes that get implemented into the game where they're having you pick different text options as though you're playing a Telltale game, but in reality these text options just simply are essentially picking a challenge for you for the next game. I think they're poorly animated, they look very archaic, and I just wish they weren't in the game whatsoever, or if they were presented in a much quicker manner where it wasn't this sort of cutscene-esque thing that isn't enjoyable to watch whatsoever. On its own, I could almost say Madden 22 is a good game if it wouldn't be consuming the exclusive license for the NFL. The fact that this is the only quote-unquote simulation football game, it could not be farther from the truth. This is more arcadey than it ever has been. Even when you're playing on simulation type difficulty, this game feels very arcadey. I mean, this is a game where we have custom stadium sort of momentum swings that on its own, if it was just to rock the camera and give you an idea of the sense of noise, wouldn't be a big deal. But they're adding in sort of special effects and different sort of RPG-like mechanics into each stadium where when you reach certain momentum, you get these other additional bonuses. It just feels very arcadey in the same way that X Factors do, because it's like achieving this certain thing in the game will unlock this ability during the game. It doesn't feel realistic at all. It feels super arcadey. And while it feels to me like player movement has improved and became a little bit more realistic than it was in previous Maddens, in my opinion, I know that's something that's very debatable, I do think that this should not be the only simulation game available, because this is not a simulation game. And I think that if this was billed as a little bit more of an arcadey game, people may not perceive Madden in such a negative light. If there was any sort of competition that was available that was more simulation focused for the people who want that, I don't think this game would be viewed in such a negative light. So I am glad that Madden 22's franchise mode has made some improvements. I think for $20, it's worth a look. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I'll see you in the next video.